Let's hope this works. Let's give this a shot. So we wrapped up in class the other day. I'll have to talk a little louder. Is my clicker? The clicker up there?
Yeah, it's right here.
Oh, all right. We wrapped up the other day World War I. We talked about the Armistice Day on November 11th, 1918. Much in part thanks to the United States' entry that really swayed the war towards the French, the British, the Russians, and their allies. Although Russia, we talked about, Russia backed out, right? They backed out, they left the war in 1917. More on that next week, or maybe even this week, probably, actually, now that I think about it. We got a big ordeal to dive into today, and that is the Paris Peace Conference. Almost immediately at the end of 1918, the world held its breath to see what the aftermath of World War I was going to look like. The war ends in November, so the calendar's going to turn over here to 1919, and about 2 months after the fighting stopped, the major world leaders came together in Paris for a peace conference that would really determine not only the immediacy of after World War I, but also this is going to have direct effect on the next 50 to 60 years of world history in a way that I really hope today you come out of this feeling like, wow, World War I did in fact directly cause World War II, but also so much of world history moving forward. And I forgot to take attendance, so pardon me for having to interrupt here. But let's just keep the ball moving here. I want to introduce you to the main players that took part at the Paris Peace Conference. These are the main world leaders of the United States, France, and England. And what I've done here throughout the class, you know, in the past, we always did like a role play activity with this, and just this year, because of the timing and everything with the testing, like I'm just gonna have to scrap it. And I know that kind of bites, but what are you gonna do? You know, we got bigger fish to sort of fry here. So, what?
That's so random.
Bigger fish to fry? You guys all know that expression? Owen's intellectual because he knows the phrase "bigger fish to fry." If that's the criteria for intellectual, then I mean I must be at Einstein. Nice with your criteria. Okay. So our big players, our big three at the Paris Peace Conference. Let me introduce you starting from right to left. In this corner, we've got the President of the United States, the one who today, this morning on the announcements, April 2nd, 1917, he asked Congress to declare war on Germany. Who do we got here? Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson. Little dinner party knowledge. Woodrow Wilson is the only president in American history with a PhD. PhD. I forget what his PhD was in, but he was at one point the president of Princeton College, Princeton University. And the irony is, Princeton. The irony is that Wilson was like hated. Like the faculty couldn't stand him when he was president of Princeton University. And then he becomes the president of the United States. Right here, we've got in the middle this guy with this massive, sort of walrus mustache. We've got Georges Clemenceau, who was the French prime minister. This guy is, you're going to see, as you can see a couple quotes from him. He was a guy with a very short temper. He did not have a lot of patience. And after all, France, as we know, was the one that was really roughed up, having the war being fought in their backyard. Georges Clemenceau. Yes.
How do you spell Clemenceau?
You'll see it later. And then this guy right here, David Lloyd George. He was the Prime Minister of the UK, United Kingdom.
David what?
David Lloyd George. Just for those of you watching, ding, this is like a usual thing. Just the constant interruptions. So thank you, Ryan, for our viewing audience at home. Showing your stuff today. On point.
On point. By your A game.
And then the fourth guy, I don't know who's the fourth guy. I really don't know who that is. I'm not sure. It's not Winston Churchill. No. Winston Churchill is not there. So Georges Clemenceau, he was the French minister. He was their big negotiator. He was known for having a quick quick fuse, short fuse, quick temper, very frustrated with some of the deliberations of the Paris Peace Conference. Here's just a great quote from Clemenceau, though. Just a great quote to kind of hit things off here at the Paris Peace Conference. And that is, in fact, how you spell Clemenceau. Zuhair, you want to just read that out for the audience here?
Okay. It is easier to make war than it is to make peace.
It is easier to make war than it is to make peace. True words, perhaps? I don't know. But Georges Clemenceau, a theme of the Paris Peace Conference that we're going to embrace as we talk about it today. Negotiations were hard going. It was an arduous process coming together to figure out peace. Because you got all these cooks in the kitchen, and everyone wants their own agenda. Everyone wants what their country is best suited for. And that's going to be a driving issue here at the Paris Peace Conference. Everybody sort of wanted things to go their way. So what happens when it doesn't go your way? What's going to be the outcome? And that's going to... No, we're not going to fight another war over they're trying to deliberate peace here, man. But the point being is that nobody's going to sort of get everything they want, and that's going to leave some countries very frustrated. And some countries, by the way, are going to have no say in the matter at all. And that's going to lead to whole other problems. What you have to realize, though, is I want you to think about Clemenceau's quote here as we talk about today. It's easier to make war than it is peace. But that's what they were here for in Paris, 1919. That's what they went to Paris for. To try to put Humpty Dumpty back together. The world had been torn apart. Remember, this is a war that affected 6 continents. So this wasn't just, the balance of Europe here. We're talking about the entire world somehow being affected by the World War I. So at Paris, this is paramount to get this right. And the pressure is on these leaders to figure it out. Can you imagine the stress levels of these guys? In fact, Woodrow Wilson, this is a true story. Wilson caught a strand of the Spanish flu while he was in Paris. He got severely sick. He didn't die from the flu, as so many did. We learned about that last week. But his body was slowed down considerably, and he would eventually, shortly after the peace conference, die of a stroke. Die of a stroke after he served as president. So Wilson was really slowed down by this. It really took a toll on his body. And we'll talk about the other outcomes here, but I want you to think about what Clemenceau here has to say. All right, there's a lot of crap going on the board, and for everyone watching at home, you're not going to scramble to write this down. I'm going to make some sense of this, but I thought it would be good to introduce you to one of the most important dynamics at the Paris Peace Conference. America had been the savior of World War I, and Woodrow Wilson did not mind letting people know this. Okay, Wilson had this sort of sanctimonious attitude. Is that a word you're all familiar with? Sanctimonious? I'll add it to our list of words here. Anyone have a guess about sanctimonious? A person who is sanctimonious. Anybody have a guess?
Straightforward.
No, not necessarily. Good guess though. Yeah.
Kind of act like a god.
Kind of act like a god. I give you props for that, man. That was somewhat, close to the answer. Sanctimonious is sort of like holier than thou. I'm better than you. I'm looking down upon you. A little bit of condescension. If I acted sanctimonious, I'd be bragging about I do kind of brag about all my trips I take. I've been a little quiet on the IG lately. I didn't post anything from Vegas this weekend. I had to keep my my adult behavior, to a quiet, I guess. But I did go to Red Rock Canyon. That was pretty. Shavanch, you are convulsing, dude. It isn't that funny. I only wish we had you on camera back there. It's not that funny. I'll be in Denver this weekend, though, in case you're keeping tabs. I'll be in Denver. So Shavanch always wants to know my trips. Hanan, I'll make a good post in Denver, though. How about that?
All right.
Tag it on? That'd be weird. I'm not in the business of tagging students on Instagram, but that's all right. All right, so Wilson came to Paris with this "I'm better than you" kind of attitude. That the United States, we're the saviors. If it weren't for the United States, your butts would still be in the trenches, right? That's kind of what Wilson took to the negotiating table. So what he brought with him was an aggressive plan, 14-point plan for how to fix the world after World War I. Wilson's 14 points. You need to know those as an ID. 14 points. You ever see 14 points? That's Woodrow Wilson's plan after World War I. And he unveiled this actually before the peace conference. So he kind of came to Paris like prepared, knowing that, hey, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to steal the show, man. I'm going to take this thing over. I'm going to be on top. I'm going to kind of run the gamut here. Even though Clemenceau was the ringleader, you know, because it was in his backyard. So Wilson shows up with his 14 points. And all the Europeans are kind of looking at this guy like, who does he think he is, you know? He didn't lose 1 million plus men in the trenches. You know, the Americans kind of sat things out for a while. But what I really do want to sort of draw your attention to, memorizing the 14 points is unnecessary. I am not looking for you to do that. It's these points right here I think we need to concentrate on. So let me walk you through it. I want these to be sort of what you link to the 14 points, these sort of themes. You know, each point represented a different idea. But the first point that I want to concentrate on is going to lead to a larger goal that Wilson brings out of the Paris Peace Conference. But the entire world saw how the system of alliances was detrimental and a true cause of World War I. Remember, we had everybody standing up outside. And, you know, Austria declares war on Serbia, and then Russia jumps in, and then Germany jumps in, and then France and Britain were waiting in the wings until Germany invaded France. Wilson wanted to ensure that there would be no more sort of backroom dealings, that these secret alliances or these treaties that countries signed did not lead to another war. I mean, that was really one of the big keys of starting the war. So in the 14 points, he really outlined the idea that we're going to have new governing rules about treaties and about alliances. And to further make sure that this actually happened, Wilson went as far as proposing that a new world organization were to be created. A governing body of countries would come together, and these groups of countries would deal with matters of foreign affairs and matters of war and matters of dispute together. They would collaborate. Does anybody remember from 7th grade, perhaps, what the name of this organization that Wilson championed? Catherine? Yes, the League of Nations. This was Wilson's brainchild. This was his big ticket item at the Paris Peace Conference. He pushed and pushed and pushed on the Europeans for the League of Nations. This was the big point of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. Well ahead of his time, in fact, you could argue Wilson was quite prescient in this idea. Prescient is a word for like seeing ahead. But Wilson really tried to encourage and implore the Euros to join in this idea of a League of Nations. And he would fight, and it would almost kill him. In fact, you could argue it did, because the stress level of Wilson at the peace conference really took a toll on him. But the irony is, the fight for the League of Nations would not be in Europe. It was back at home in America. More on that later. Let's talk about a couple other key themes within Wilson's 14 points. Reduction of militaries, I mean, that was a big part of the cause, build up the military. That's a pretty obvious one. This is crucial. This is really crucial. These last 2 points I want to talk about. Freedom of the seas and open trade. What a very modern 21st century concept he was proposing here. Wilson really wanted to make sure that countries could trade, that there be international sort of cooperation. Glad that outlet works. What economic ism is free, open market, free trade? What economic ism is Wilson supporting here? Anusha? Yeah, capitalism. This is the root of capitalism. It's a very strong capitalist perspective. Open trade, freedom of the seas. Really, really 21st century concept here. When you think about our trade alliances, our trade networks, we have existing today, Wilson was way ahead of his time in that part. And this last point. We know the Americans played a role in imperialism, but not quite to the extent of the Europeans. And so Wilson proposed that the Europeans cool it down with imperialism. In fact, he supported the idea that the Europeans allowed their former colonies to gain their independence. And he called this concept is known as, in world history, or geopolitical, as self-determination. Allow countries to self-determine their status. Again, the specifics are all on here, and you could go and memorize them if you wanted, yes. You'd never be asked anything that specific on the AP test. But you could be asked about principles of the 14 points. Free trade, capitalism, self-determination, League of Nations. I could see that happening. But I couldn't see it. You have to, go through the exact point by point by point. Yeah, what's the 6-point League of Nations? Of course, the Europeans are going to look at this last part and say, who's this guy think he is? No way we're giving up our colonies. We know how valuable they were to the Europeans. But, Wilson really had a hard time getting the League of Nations approved in America. And in fact, in the United States, Wilson would come back successful from Europe. The Europeans all agreed to the League of Nations. He convinced them, even though he had that sanctimonious, attitude. The Europeans did eventually agree. But back in the United States, our government did not approve. Our government did not approve. And this is really what led to Wilson's health declining. In the Senate, Wilson went toe-to-toe with the Republican Party. Wilson was a Democrat. And the Senate killed him. They refused to support and ratify the treaty that came out of the Paris Peace Conference. This is a great cartoon, What's in world history, whose death does this cartoon sort of allude to with the death of the Paris Peace Treaty? Oh, come on! Who died in world history getting stabbed in the back by senators? I'll deal with them for laughing. It's not cool to laugh at somebody's bad guess. Because let's be honest, I watched this. You thought the Civil War was in the 1900s at the History Bowl. And Shavansh, I pretty much remember you not answering a single question at the History Bowl. So you two who like to laugh the loudest, I could go some places, keep going. Behind. Abraham Lincoln was not stabbed in the back in the Senate. He was shot in the back of the head by John Wilkes Booth. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. All right. Come on. What famous world leader got stabbed in the back by the Senate, Kasha? Julius Caesar, yeah. So Julius Caesar was stabbed in the Senate by his enemies who felt he had gained too much power. Wilson had fought for the League of Nations. He had got it into the treaty. By the way, I forgot to mention the treaty. So we get the Paris Peace Conference. Anybody know what the treaty was called? Yeah, Treaty of Versailles. Yep. More on that in a minute. Right, Versailles is where they signed the treaty. That was the Louis XIV where he built the palace, the elephant in the room, the symbol of the French monarchy. But yeah, how about that? So the irony is, he goes all the way over there to Paris, works his butt off, trying to get everybody to agree to the League of Nations, and everyone does. And he comes back home, and American people are like, nah, we're not having this, man. We're not having this. We don't want another war. We don't want to get dragged into with these Euros again to their mess. People had enough here in America. The 20s are all, and the 30s are all about isolation. America's going to isolate itself as much as possible. And this killed Wilson. Literally, it took his health. It robbed him of his health. The battle to get it approved in America. So he fought so hard in Europe. He won that battle. But the only battle that mattered was here in the United States. And that is a good plug for our little Constitution here. You know, Chig? The fact that the Constitution allows for that sort of thing to happen. The Senate has to ratify these treaties. It's a good example of checks and balances. Keep that in mind for next year, AP government. Great example of checks and balances in our government. Poor Wilson. Fought so hard. Died here in the Senate. But not in Europe. So Europe, a lot of European countries joined the League of Nations. A lot of European countries joined the League of Nations. Not the United States. Not the United States. I think I have a quote here. This one's a good one. I think it's about Wilson's sanctimonious attitude. Yeah. So David Lloyd George, he was the British Prime Minister. This is what he had to say about Wilson and George Clemenceau. This one's great. Let's get let's get Owen, you want to read that for us? So talk about the treaty. So look, Dave, this one always cracks me up.
Not that. It's during episode of Jesus Christ.
Okay, so the UK Prime Minister, the British Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, you know, when asked about the treaty in the newspapers, George Clemenceau was Napoleon. He was a short guy, and nothing against short guys. We don't all have tempers. You know, I don't like that reputation of having that short guys have a lot of tempers. But Clemenceau did. He was a drinker, a womanizer, a temper. He had a big temper. So he was constantly frustrated throughout the entire negotiations. Meanwhile, Wilson, sanctimonious, you know, better than everybody. Jesus Christ. You know, that was kind of just good British humor there. Good British humor. But look, nothing was humorous. Nothing Brock the Rock was humorous about one of the most important developments in the Treaty of Paris, or the Treaty of Versailles, that came out of the Paris Peace Conference, which was splitting up the Ottoman territory. Who could remind me? This is a very important recap question from when we talked about the Ottoman Empire a couple weeks ago when Mr. Moore was checking out class that Friday, if you recall. We talked about how there was great tension that erupted in the Ottoman Empire. As the empire was fracturing, getting picked apart by Europeans, getting picked off by the Russians as well, but also independence movements were sweeping throughout the Ottoman Empire under nationalism. Who can recall what tension built within the remaining Muslims in the Ottoman Empire? I spent a lot of time on this in class a few weeks ago. Who can recall what the tension was there? Yeah.
Like the Arabs were like sad.
Sad? Sad's what happens when, like, you know, a girl you like tells you she doesn't want to hang out with you anymore. That's sad. That's never going to happen to you. Okay. I don't know what just happened. If you just did what I thought you had to do, if you just, I have it on camera first of all. So me making a joke about something, then we should have just kept it right there. It should not have been advanced and pointing at anybody if you were taunting Shivansh or anything like that. I don't know what that was all about, but if anybody wants to fill me in after class, I'd like to get to the bottom of that, because let's keep things one joke by teacher, one response by student works. Calling out other students into the joke gets a little bit uncomfortable. You're onto something, unfortunately. That's what got lost in the shuffle. But using the word sad is a bit of a cheap word. Sad is not a way to describe the state of the Arabs living in the Ottoman Empire. And what was the state of the Arabs? As the Ottoman Empire was being broken down, what was going on with the Arabs?
The Arabs wanted to break away from the Ottoman Empire because they thought they were moving away from Islam.
A lot of traditionalists, yes, that's a good place to get us rolling here. A lot of traditional Arabs who were conservative Muslims felt that the Turkish Empire was moving away from Islam. It was becoming more secular. It was becoming more non-religious, more westernized. And that was all due to what revolution that took place within the Ottoman Empire?
Tanzimat reform?
Well, the Tanzimat reforms led to this revolution.
Modernized.
No, that's not the name of the revolution. You're on the right track. You have the themes down, but you don't have the ID term. Catherine? The Young Turk movement. The Ottoman Empire was becoming more and more exclusively Turkish. Case in point, the Armenian genocide. That was a horrible example of what was going on in the Ottoman Empire. But the Ottoman Empire, which had fought on the side of the Germans, was on the losing end of the war. And the Europeans were coming for blood. Or I should say they were coming for... what, 3 letters? Not blood, that's just an expression.
Oil.
Oil. Yup, oil. You got it. You got it. You see, with the Arabs in the Ottoman Empire, the Arab world, the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Jordanians, the Iraqis, they all fought on the side of the Europeans, the French and the British, during the war, because they wanted to get rid of the Ottoman Empire. And the Europeans had made all sorts of deals and promises with these Arabs. We win the war, you'll get your freedom. You'll have your self-determination. You'll have your sovereignty. But a lot of that began to change as the war was winding down. And even before Paris in 1919, the British, which had obviously been one of the most impactful countries in terms of African imperialism, the British began to shake the Arab world up with a letter written by a British minister talking about what to do with territories in the Arab world, specifically Palestine, which had been a strong Arab territory for many centuries. The note that we're about to look at here is known as the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration. Balfour. B-A-L-F-O-U-R. The Balfour Declaration. We're going to chunk this out and read it aloud. And I'm going to explain, because I know you guys didn't have anything over the weekend for reading, because we're under this homework embargo. You guys have it so rough. No homework at all this week.
Oh, man.
No kidding. No kidding. Oh, man. Arthur Balfour was a minister, a British minister to the Arab world. And in this declaration, Balfour hints at something that the British are looking to do in the Arab world beyond the war. This is a very key document in the history of the Middle East. Pranish, can I get you in on this? And Sana. Pranish, will you take it to where it reads, facilitate the achievement of this object. And then Sana, you'll pick it up at it being clearly understood. This is the Balfour Declaration. It was sent in 1917, November 2nd.
Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object.
It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country, I should be grateful if you would bring the declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation.
The word Zionism is a key word here. For thousands of years, Jewish people of the Hebrew faith, had no country. They had no country. They had no nation. Ever since thousands of years, back to the biblical era, even before like the classical period of world history, the Hebrews had been pushed out of their land. They had been enslaved for long periods of time by some groups. And while they had their own kingdoms temporarily in world history, Jewish people had been forced out of their homeland, which was Palestine for a while. What that led to were the developments of what are known as diaspora communities. This is a word you may have seen before. A diaspora are communities of people living outside of a homeland. You could argue that here in South Chandler, there's a strong South Asian diaspora. We have a very tight-knit, small community of South Asians here in South Chandler. So in some sense, it's like a diaspora. Diasporas are typical, especially in big cities like New York. You have entire neighborhoods of Italian communities living together. Throughout world history, when merchants would live in foreign countries, like, for example, Arab Muslims that went to Indonesia for trade, formed diaspora communities, communities of people living outside of a homeland. Well, for thousands of years, Jewish people had lived in diasporas, communities all over the world. They didn't have a homeland. They didn't have a country. So they settled in Europe. They settled in Asia. They settled in Africa, Latin America. A lot of them came to the United States. But all over. But prior to World War I, as nationalism was rising, Jewish people caught the fury of nationalism. But the problem was, they don't have a country. How can you be nationalistic without a country? How can you call yourself excessively proud of your country when you don't have a country? So born in the nationalism movement around World War I was the idea of Zionism. Zionism was quite simply a nationalism movement for Jewish people, but more importantly, it was about creating a country for Jewish people. There was no country. Jewish people didn't have a territory. They didn't have a homeland. Now, historically, Palestine had been that homeland, but we're talking about thousands of years ago. And over the course of thousands of years, Palestine had been under control of the Ottoman Empire, various Muslim caliphates as well. But Arabs dominated Palestine for centuries. But what's the Balfour Declaration suggesting? As World War I is winding down, what's the Balfour Declaration suggesting here?
Give back, take Palestine from the Ottomans and give it to the Jews as a homeland?
I don't know if it's about that necessarily insinuates taking it all from the Ottomans, but you're right about one thing, Mr. Ding. there is a very clear suggestion that Palestine could be a good destination, a good homeland for Jewish people around the world. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Balfour was a representative of the British government. How do you think this was received in the Arab world? Arabs living in Palestine, Arabs living in Egypt, Arabs living throughout the Ottoman Empire, who were fighting for the British, with the British against the Ottomans. How do you think this was received?
I think they were infuriated, probably since they were making sure because they were fighting for their territory, but then the British was just handed to not necessarily handed, but gave it to them.
Well,
which the Arabs were.
There's a suggestion that that's what's going to happen, correct? Yeah. The dynamics of this Balfour Declaration are so tense because you've got these Arabs that have been fighting side by side, bleeding and dying out in the desert with you, with your armies, to defeat a common enemy. But when word got out that the British government, and that's the key, is it not? This is not some random guy off on his own. He's lending the king's perspective, the king's name, into this document, which was written, the intended audience was to a Lord Rothschild, who was a very prominent Zionist, if you sort of pick up on that. Pass this on to your Zionist allies. Pass this on to your Zionist allies. We're suggesting this idea. Whatever good faith had been built up in the Arab world towards the English and the French was severely diminished with the Balfour Declaration, because the hint and the insinuation was there. The insinuation was there that the British were suggesting that Jewish people move into an Arab country. And that, to the Arabs, was like being stabbed in the back. But there's no doubt that when the war ended, one of the big issues at Paris was carving up the Ottoman Empire. Just like China had been split up into spheres of influence, and just like in the scramble for Africa, Africa was carved up, so too were the Ottoman territories. And what was eventually proposed and agreed upon by many of the Europeans, that the Europeans effectively built themselves their own little spheres of influence in the old Ottoman Empire. Many of the Arab territories fell under control of European powers. Britain, of course, was the big winner, gaining much of the territories. France also heavily influential in taking over parts of the Middle East, especially Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, especially Syria and Lebanon. Now, Israel as a country did not exist. This is a modern-day map. This is Palestine, though. This is Palestine. That's where the British were suggesting Jewish people could return. Here lies in one of the most overlooked aspects of World War I. And I know that we have to still tomorrow talk about what happened to Germany, right? Because how's Germany going to pay? But I can't shortchange this. I can't sit here idly like so many Western world history teachers do and just blow this over. The root cause of so much of our modern-day turmoil in the Middle East, the distrust that exists in the Arab world towards the West, the resentment that's spawned countless acts of terrorism, countless acts of war. The distrust starts back in World War I. And make no mistake, the Europeans hung the Arabs out to dry. I've been listening to an audiobook on this topic recently because I've been fascinated by this. And again, it came down to 3 letters, man. Oil. The Europeans were not going to let those oil-rich nations go to waste. They just couldn't see it happening. It's like the Americans in the Philippines or the Belgians in the Congo. They just couldn't let those resources go to waste. And what's really startling is in the book that I'm listening to right now, all the countries sent out teams of spies and operatives, people undercover, to discover where the rich oil fields were. You know, the Americans had teams of like archaeologists that were out there looking, you know, in the desert for ruins, when in fact they were digging for oil. And where America got involved here, because we stayed out of a lot of this, America started allying with Saudi Arabia. But if you want to grow up and better understand the tensions between the West and the Middle East, I'm sorry, it's not at 9/11. You don't start at 9/11. It's like I taught you about on 9/11. Bin Laden's plan to hatch 9/11 had nothing to do with the immediacy. It was history. It was deep-rooted distrust, deep-rooted hatred. And I'm not saying that all Arabs distrust the West or anything like that by any stretch of imagination. But there's tension between these nations, and there's tension in the regions. And these tensions go back. And we're talking almost 100 years ago this conference was held. Heck, next November. Or not next November, sorry, 2 Novembers from now will be the 100th year anniversary of all this. You want to understand how history plays a role in shaping the past, shaping the future? Here's a great example. The Arabs got leveled. They got stabbed in the back, and they were not allowed to self-determine. They were not allowed, as Wilson had wanted, to create their own countries. Some were given that sense of independence, as you'll see momentarily, but not all. And here's a great quote here to summarize kind of what happened. This is from Harold Nicholson, who was a diplomat, so somebody who was there serving in the British, capacity. Kasha, you want to read that since you're up front?
Clemenceau, Lloyd George, and President Wilson, it is appalling that these ignorant and irresponsible men should be cutting Asia Minor to bits as if they were dividing a cake.
Now, Asia Minor was a reference to like the region, the Middle East, Ottoman Empire territory. Like, I can't sit idly and just ignore this. I can't in one sort of statement be like, oh yeah, and by the way, the Ottoman Empire got broken up. I mean, I used to do that, and now I realize the error of my ways when I first started teaching this class. Because this is too damn important to understanding modern-day politics and modern-day tensions. When we look at, Israel and Palestine and that turmoil that exists today, man, that document was really the kickstart to a lot of tension 100 years later. Because, in fact, after World War I, when the British did take over parts of Palestine, that was one of their agendas. They encouraged Jewish people to flee their diasporas and to go back to Palestine. And the Arabs, again, felt like they had been royally screwed. And there were agreements, and there were documents, and it all got shredded up for the most part. So this is one of those sort of side notes to World War I that often gets too overlooked. It gets too overlooked. But ultimately, let's end on just before and after. And then tomorrow, we're going to talk about the consequences for Germany. And that's when I'll begin linking what happened to Germany to Germany's rise to becoming a fascist power. And that is a term that we'll learn starting tomorrow. But here it is. I mean, here's the World War I, extreme makeover. Here's what the world looked like before the war. And here's what it looked like afterwards. And while the entire Middle East is not in focus here, one thing you will realize is that the Ottoman Empire was split up severely, as was the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Look how much Austria lost. Here's 12. There's Austria. Look at how much Austria was split up into different countries. An immediate consequence of World War I was the breakdown of these empires that had lost the war. Germany, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire lost countless territory. They were reduced to very small nations. But in the Arab world, the shock and the betrayal would have long-term ramifications. Ramifications that remain ingrained in the relationship between the West and the Arab world. And there's no doubt, greed, oil, imperialism, these themes still existed even after the war. The war didn't solve those problems. Perhaps it only created more. It's going to be tough this week because we don't have any readings. I can't give homework, according to the admin. So class is going to feel like it's more of me talking. I'm trying to do the best I can to keep you engaged. You guys just need to think about these issues. And don't hesitate to come and speak to me about it. The only office hours I could offer this week are just crazy because we have such little time. It's today after school. You have 5th hour lunch today, short lunch today, right? 30 minutes? Yeah. I'm here if you want to come in for anything, writing, whatever. But good stuff today. I'm going to shut this thing off.